if this is your first time at one of our events or virtual community events, we wanted to say welcome, and I hope you enjoy today's session. And if this is not your first time here, welcome back, and it's really happy to see you. I can see some familiar faces already, so welcome back. For those of you who are not familiar with Ascender, I wanted to talk a little bit about our organization, what we do, and what we stand for here in Pittsburgh. We are Pittsburgh's community for entrepreneurs. We offer educational programs, mentorship, expert coaching, a business incubation, a year-long business incubation, and also a collaborative workspace located in East Liberty here in Pittsburgh. We have a lot of programs that are meant to really drive entrepreneurs from idea to growing to scaling. So we have a lot more information in our website. So I highly recommend that you go to our website, ascenderpgh.com, to learn more, and also how can you be part of our community as well. Today's session is part of our Ascender's monthly community events. These events are free and open to the public. We connect with experts who are subject matter experts in different fields that are relevant for business owners right now. So they donate their time to come here and connect with you. They provide tangible skills, and also they cover a particular topic. So I'm really excited today to have Scott from Eagle Dream Technologies. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them. So Scott Weber here is the VP of Cloud Solutions with over 20 years of experience in IT research and cloud computer. Scott brings a passion for innovation, architecture, and emerging patterns. He focuses on forward-thinking solutions to provide high availability and scalability to both the infrastructure and software system. Our other Scott McTaggart, has an extensive management, consulting, and advisory experience in both electronic security systems and growing young companies. Some of you may know him as the host of the Pitchwork podcast. If you don't know about that podcast yet, I highly recommend that you go and check it out. You will learn a ton from it. Or as the co-founder of the KRNLS consulting firm. But earlier this year, Scott joined Eagle Dream Technologies as a sales director. Without further ado, I want to start the session today by asking Scott to tell us a little bit about themselves, who they are, and what the position and what they do at Eagle Dream Technologies. So I'm going to pass it on to you. How about let's start with Scott McTaggart.
I did it. I know, and you rubbing it in is not making it better. Okay, let's just keep on moving. Hello, everyone. I'm a huge fan of Ascender. You may have even seen me around Ascender over the last few years. As Anya mentioned, for several years, I've been the host of the Pitchworks podcast. That was somewhat interrupted by COVID. I'm more of an in-person, in-studio kind of a host, and well, I'm not really that excited about being in-person in the studio right now. But I joined Eagle Dream back in January, and my job, for the most part, is to get the word out about what is possible and then help people get to where they're trying to go. Eagle Dream is best known as a cloud solutions provider. If you're thinking about the complexity of your business, I promise you, I can make it a lot more complex if I throw all of the various possibilities of AWS and software and the cloud at you. Our job is to take that and tame it for you. It's really easy to get overwhelmed with what's available and what is possible and not know necessarily what to do next. So Eagle Dream's job is to organize all of that, curate the information, pass it on to you, and in a lot of cases actually do some of the work for you. As I was telling Anya earlier today, we were recently acquired and are now part of the PwC network, and we're really excited about that. And I'm available for questions. You can always find me. My contact information will be in the chat box before we all leave today.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Hey, everyone. I'm Scott Weber. As Anya said in the introductions, I run our cloud computing team here at Eagle Dream Technologies. We're also what's known as a premier tier consulting partner with AWS. There's about 40 premier tier consulting partners that operate in North America. To give you an idea of the scale, there's something on the order of 60,000 AWS partners globally. So we're one of roughly 40 at the highest level from a consulting standpoint. I'm also what's known as an AWS APN ambassador. Ambassadors are recognized both internally and externally by AWS for those individuals that are very passionate about AWS, speak publicly about it, help, but more importantly, understand the intricacies of AWS and help our customers be successful on the platform. So I'm really excited to be here and talk to you guys as, people looking to do a startup or are actively building startups, because for me, some of the startup projects that we've worked on in my time at Eagle Dream have been some of the most fun and interesting projects that we've been able to do. The cloud today is where startups are starting. And that is what is enabling the startups to, in some cases, unseat the entrenched incumbents in an industry, because when you start in the cloud, the ability for you to move fast and to innovate is really baked into your DNA. The other thing is like a VC firm today is not going to invest in somebody that says, hey, I need millions upon millions of dollars to go buy hardware that's going to take multiple months to go get into my data center before I can actually show, a useful thing being built upon it. So as we get started today, just a little bit more about Eagle Dream. We really focus on this idea of cloud native transformation, or building your company cloud natively from the ground up. So what does cloud native mean? Cloud native really means starting with those building blocks and standing on the shoulders of the giants, if you will, to do things that you wouldn't have been able to do before, or that you would have been spending millions of dollars in hardware to be able to go do. So as an example, 6.5 years ago when I joined Eagle Dream, I was lucky enough to be employee number 7. We were a startup in IT consulting. And I was brought on board because our 2 founders were becoming the angel investors in a healthcare data analytics platform. That was an idea from the woman that was the director of primary care for all of URMC. So you guys are in Pittsburgh, you understand UPMC. URMs, or University of Rochester Medical Center, isn't quite as big as UPMC, but it's the same idea. Think about the person sitting on top of all of primary care for UPMC. This woman had an idea of how to leverage all the data that's locked up in electronic medical record systems, but do the data analysis so that you could find the most at-risk patients and get them into the office and make sure that their conditions were controlled. We built this platform in record time on top of AWS services that the likes of, the Netflixes of the world at the time were putting out there, that we were then just able to stand on their shoulders. So that's what I mean when I say cloud native, right? We're not talking anymore about standing up servers or virtual machines for customers in the cloud. Cloud native to us means at a minimum containers, if not sort of this idea of running on serverless architecture. So again, you focus on the delivery of your code, the delivery of the functionality to your target customers. Some of our core practices, we're pretty proud of the fact that we're full stack. So we can do everything from help a company get their website together, to figure out the UI UX, do UX testing to get, if UI is actually critical to what you're doing. That UI UX practice actually grew out of the healthcare application I mentioned. Our UI UX team, along with the visionary CEO, put together UIs that were recognized by the industry. The company wasn't even 3 years old, and they beat the entrenched incumbents on population health management, mainly because the UI was so intuitive. Okay, so you had a scrappy startup. We went from an idea to actual medical data in the platform in a customer's hands in 9 months. And in 3 years, we grew it to where they had 10 million patient lives in management, and we were able to take on the likes of Epic and Cerner and outpace them and win awards that they couldn't win in terms of what we could do with population health management, largely attributed to having a very functional, lean, data-driven UI. We're doing a lot of work helping customers with data lakes and analytics, which then leads into AI and machine learning. AI and machine learning is a real thing. I think it's still a burgeoning area that we're going to continue to see a lot of growth in. Pittsburgh is a hub for AI with UPMC, or I'm sorry, with Carnegie Mellon and University of Pittsburgh there. And obviously doing things on software development and engineering, because that's what all of these things are built on. We like to say the cloud is just an API call away. Everything in AWS is addressed through an API call. So it's really becoming a software problem to get these platforms out into the wild and launched.
Real quick, Scott, I want to touch on something that I think this group might actually benefit from that we don't even talk about a lot of times, and that is the transformations that take place, or the disruptions that take place. A lot of times we've been all kind of brought up to believe and seen so many times, like the rich get richer, right? But a lot of times in disruption, that rich company, like some of the ones that Scott was mentioning, they don't think that a thing is real yet, or they don't think that it's ready for prime time yet. And there's an arrogance that goes along with that, where it's like, if you can mobilize and roll faster than they can, you can pull something like what Netflix did, right? Blockbuster was the rich in that category. They were dominant. They had a ton of real estate. They had thousands of employees, but here comes Netflix from behind, and just using things that Blockbuster had decided weren't quite ready yet, literally buried them. So, I think for a startup crew, it's really important for you to remember, like, the information is out there, but not everybody thinks that it's time yet, or not everybody wants to put the effort into exploring it.
Yep. No, those are great points. So we really like to help our customers understand the art of the possible, and education with our customers, just like we're doing today, is the center of what we really try to do. The cloud and AWS are growing at a phenomenal rate. In 2019, they introduced over 2,500 new services and feature improvements to their services. This year, I think the number is probably approaching 3,500 or 4,000. They've gone from 3 services in 2006 when AWS officially launched to they now have about 190 unique services that you can leverage. And it just keeps growing faster and faster. So actually on this slide we mentioned, the company we started in the healthcare space was called Eagle Dream Health. It was purchased by NextGen Healthcare in 2017, and the class award is what it had won because of the quality of what we were able to build and the way that that company was able to move so quickly. So again, education is really what we try to focus on. Eagle Dream Health is just one example of a startup. The case that I'm going to talk about today is a company called 5x5 Technologies, which is a startup we've been working with for about 3 years. Really unique. I think you'll enjoy that. We've helped other customers in the medical wearable space try to figure out how to architect their solutions into AWS. We've helped several other startups across different industries, understand how to operate in AWS and grow. One last thing about AWS. We really focus on this idea of well architected, so getting the foundations for you done correctly from day one. If any of you are looking at trying to go into a compliant or highly secure or controlled space, this is really important, right? The last thing you need as a startup is somebody to hack into your account and steal all your customer data, or worse, you have some sort of data breach. So we really focused on this idea of helping our customers be well architected from day one. We also have 3 AWS ambassadors on staff.
Speaking locally, there is an epidemic of, I know a dude who can put me on AWS, and that is almost always dated information. I'm not saying that one person can't help. I am saying that there is a proper, well-architected framework that is published and people can access, that it often gets ignored.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I know, I've done what's called a well-architected review on multiple startups environments. And, sometimes you start out like, well, it's just an idea, right? Well, we want to get that idea done right from the first place. And you'll actually save yourself time and money if you just do it right in the beginning, as opposed to trying to go back later and now put controls on something that's sprawled too big. So let's talk about AWS in general for a minute, because the concept of AWS may be new to some of you. You know, AWS is, you know, some people, it used to be classified as public cloud. It is a public cloud provider. The sort of the big three in the space are AWS, Azure, and GCP. GCP is a very far behind AWS for that matter. But really, why do you want to go to the cloud? Why do you want to go to AWS? Cost. Okay. The price point for doing things in AWS, you can't even begin to touch if you're trying to do this in somebody else's data center, in a co-location, leasing space from somebody. You can't even begin to approach the cost point. We typically see when we're working with larger organizations trying to move them into AWS, anywhere from 40, 50, sometimes 60% cost savings by getting them out of their data centers and into AWS. The elasticity and the agility, that's really important to entrepreneurs and startups, right? Everybody wants to have that inflection point on the hockey stick and be able to grow. The last thing you want to do is hit the hockey stick inflection point and everything turn into a bubbling pile of goo because you weren't really ready for that to happen.
Never seen it. Don't know what you're talking about.
That's what we really try to help our customers understand is how do you build this? What are the tools to use so that you never have to worry about that scale point? And when we talk about 5x5 today, I'll talk a little bit about how we built that system. They have zero worries about scalability because of the way the system's been built. A lot of things in AWS are open and flexible. So thinking open source tools, secure. So about 5 years ago, we hit an inflection point with cloud. Previous to 5 years ago, you didn't go to the cloud because of security. Then some things changed, and now you go to the cloud because of security. You can operate more securely in the cloud than you could ever do in your own data center. You still got to do it right, though. Okay, so we've all seen the headlines, the Capital Ones, the Verizons. You know, there was one just more recently. It was a hotel booking system. There was a data breach. Well, I'm here to tell you that they aren't data breaches in that something got hacked. They're data breaches because somebody didn't configure things correctly. Okay, every one of those data breaches came out of one AWS service called Amazon S3, the simple storage service, because it wasn't configured correctly. Okay, so you got to do it right. And then a global reach, right? The dream is to be able to operate globally. Airbnb, you know, startup, they've operated in AWS since day one. They operate out of the Northern Virginia region, but they're a global operation. Okay, so, you know, those are just a couple of examples of why you want to be in AWS. What sets AWS apart? They're the longest standing and most innovative cloud provider. Okay. I liken AWS to a box of Legos that somebody dumps on the table. And, you know, some people are going to be able to look at that box and build the Millennium Falcon, and some people are just going to throw up their hands and not know where to start. It looks like we got a question here. Can you geofence the data storage? So great question. So first off, whenever you put something into AWS, you know exactly where it is. So you choose a region that you're going to operate out of. That is where your data lives. So if we're talking about compliance purposes, something like that, you know exactly where your data is at. There are many, many ways to secure that data. Geofencing can be one of them. There are lots of security tools inside AWS to make sure you're not putting S3 data publicly, which is how almost every one of the breaches has happened except Capital One. Capital One has a slightly different issue. But, you know, there's lots of different ways to secure that data. And a lot of the times with AWS, the security is on by default, but somebody changed the default setting. Okay. We already mentioned the breadth and depth of services, the pace of innovation. It's crazy to try to keep up with. You know, even as a partner that is a premier level partner, it is a challenge for my team to keep up to everything that they're doing. That's why it takes a team to really understand. I've got specialists in security, I've got specialists in network, I've got specialists in cloud native, I have specialists that focus on migration, specialists in AI and ML, because it's gotten too big. Truly have a global footprint. So as we start talking about web applications that need to be accessed anywhere around the world, this concept of edge locations becomes really, really important. So edge locations are things where your content delivery network, so pushing content out to the edge. So you have 216, and well, that's probably 200 and approaching 230 now, because again, continue to innovate. As hard as this is for a lot of people to understand, the cloud just keeps getting cheaper. Okay, AWS has a track record of price decreases. Now it's on a service by service basis, but they do continue to drop prices, and sometimes it's pretty remarkable drop. On one of the services, they dropped it by 80%. Okay, so I mean that can be significant. Let's see, I think that's about it for this one. And why AWS? This is the most recent copy of the Gartner report for cloud and platform services. So cloud infrastructure and platform services. Amazon Web Services is the clear leader, right? Everybody wants that upper right position. And what was interesting is this year's Magic Quadrant report, they slightly changed it. So always in the past, it looked just at infrastructure. So think like virtual machines across the cloud providers. And Microsoft had started to inch closer and closer to AWS. But this year, they now pulled in what they call the platform services. So things like the serverless services, the container services, the database platform as a service. And that then separated the first and second place quite a bit. Okay. So it's not just us saying, you know, AWS is good. You know, one of the stalwarts in Gartner is also saying that. So let's talk about a startup that we've helped grow on AWS. And I mentioned this before, so we're going to take a look at a serverless architecture and in the context of a company called 5x5 Technologies. And we've been working with this customer for about 3 years now. Them going from an idea that they'd done some prototyping code with to now they're operating and spending, I think the last 2 months, they've been north of $100,000 a month in AWS. And they do some really, really unique things. So 5x5 Technologies is on the leading edge of what you can do with drones. And their whole concept is to build a digital twin of some very large piece of infrastructure that's out there. And they've decided to focus on cell towers first. So take a drone and, you know, not an off-the-shelf drone, if you will, like a drone with like a 40 megapixel high quality imager on it. Fly it in a detailed, predetermined path around a cell tower. And if anybody on here knows anything about radio frequencies, the fact that they can fly a drone around the cell tower is pretty impressive, given how much radio frequency radiation comes off of one. Take a couple thousand 2D photos of that cell tower on a prescribed flight path. Then bring those photos back, load them into the cloud, run them through a piece of software that converts those 2D photos into a 3D model that is a digital twin, truly a digital twin, accurate to a 32nd of an inch. So a couple 100-foot tall cell tower can be measured on a web browser interface to the detail of a 32nd of an inch. So what can you do with this? They can measure how thick steel is on the structures. In a web browser, the 3D images can approach 100 gigapixels or larger. You can directly interact, rotate, zoom in, zoom out, cut away surfaces on the cell tower in a web browser. The web application front end is built in this serverless model, and we're going to continue to talk about that as we go through here. So why is this really a thing? You're like, well, it's a cell tower. Well, it turns out cell towers have very strict inspection requirements. There's something like a gap of 20,000 workers globally to go out and climb cell towers. And it takes, typically, if a company wants to modify a cell tower, it takes a human climbing it 7 times to complete a piece of equipment upgrade on the cell tower. And oh, by the way, if the human goes up the cell tower, they have to shut it down because there's too much EMI for a human to be, you know, up on these platforms and way too much electrical power.
Yeah, and that 7 times is if things are going right. Like that's if you knew what you were going to find when you went up there.
Right. Also think about when is one time that you really got to go look at what's going on a cell tower is after like a hurricane comes through the southeast, right? They got to know before they re-energize the tower, is it good to go, right? Or it could get really expensive. So let's use drones, right? And then let's get to a 3D model of what that, and so what you see here is I'll say a flattened, but this is actually what the software generated of a cell tower. So this is a cell tower generated from 2D photos into a 3D model of this cell tower. So one of the things that we worked on jointly with AWS for this customer in the early days was the 3D rendering software, okay, that would take these 2D photos and convert to the 3D model could easily be thrown off, and it would lengthen the render time if there was pictures in essentially the roll, if you will, right, in the uploaded set that didn't include parts of the cell tower complex. So like, figure the drone operator has the drone out, maybe setting it up, the digital camera accidentally takes some pictures of blades of grass as the drone's sitting on the ground, or the drone's flying and is just taking pictures of empty space. That's not useful to the 3D rendering software. It actually confuses it, makes it take longer. So we were able to build an AI model that simply would sort photos. And it looked at it and said, well, is there something that resembles some part of a cell phone tower or not in the picture? And so when the photos were then uploaded, we could sort through them very quickly and say, well, only these photos have anything that resembles part of a cell tower or a cell tower complex in it, feed that into the 3D rendering software. Okay, so this is an example of how AI and ML is working today for a customer. So what does the architecture behind the web application for 5x5 look like? So let's take a look at this. And again, this is the web application front end versus where all the heavy lifting is happening in the back end. That architecture would take about 5 screens of this size to detail out. But I'll tell you, the back end also leverages heavily this idea of serverless. So the serverless framework in AWS is known as Lambda. And it was a paradigm that got released 4 or 5 years ago, but really has come into its own just lately in the last couple of years as a platform for developing web applications with. So 5x5 has users primarily in the US right now, but they're looking at expanding to other countries because they're one of the few in the industry that can do something like this. So the users interact with a service called CloudFront. Well, CloudFront is a content distribution network. What does a content distribution network do? It pushes your assets, your web presence out to the edge so that, if you're in Pittsburgh, you're going to go to the closest point of the AWS edge to start to interact with AWS. So if you're in California, you're going to go shortest path, right? You're not necessarily backhauling all the time back to Northern Virginia. And when you're running a workload like 5x5 that is incredibly image heavy, shortening that network path and caching data out to the edge is incredibly important. So all the 3D files, all the 2D files, because they also allow you to actually pull up the 2D photo that the drone took, are stored in Amazon S3 buckets. Amazon S3 can be directly accessed by CloudFront and basically function as a web server that's infinitely scalable. And I truly mean infinitely scalable. I have a side business, family business, that we use S3 once a year. And I'm serving several million web page hits in a couple-hour time frame, and it cost me $50 for the weekend. And I have zero issues worrying about whether this thing's going to scale to handle it. It has infinite scalability. There's no limits on how much you can store into Amazon S3 either.
Now, by comparison, Scott, this is a part where I want to sort of draw a parallel. A lot of times when we run into something where, I will be diplomatic and I will say it's maybe an older mindset that went into it. You're going all the way to Northern Virginia, but you're not using an architecture that is designed for what you're doing. You're using an architecture that is designed for just any old computer program. Right. So this thought process of, I think you said 3,500 is the new feature set that's going to be in the next 12-month roll, right? So you don't have to keep up with what's current or whatever, but all of these things are designed for optimization. All of these were developed as a response to a problem.
Right. Yeah, the other thing, and Scott's touching on this, 90% of the features that AWS rolls out are direct feedback from their customers. AWS is a really interesting beast, I'll call it, since it's part of a 1 million employee business. They talk about fanatical focus on their customers. And look, a lot of businesses will say that. These guys truly live it on a daily basis. If a customer is having a problem, they want to know, and they want to know how, and they want to try to figure out how they're going to fix it. So back to the architecture here. We have things like API gateway that front our Lambda functions. So this is just how we're going to make API calls from our web application. Lambda functions, now we're into another serverless service. So what's really cool about this whole architecture, there are no servers that the development team is worried about maintaining, patching, babysitting, anything. Everything in this architecture will grow dynamically to whatever the throughput level is that 5x5 is going to need as they grow. Lambda, API gateway, CloudFront is sort of all pay as you go, right? So Lambda functions, you pay by the number of executions and by how long it takes the function to execute, metered on hundreds of milliseconds. API gateway, it's $3.50 for 1 million API requests. And API gateway, Lambda, and some other services have what's called the free tier. Your first 1 million Lambda invocations a month are free. Okay. I did a calculator at one point in time for a customer. 2 million Lambda invocations a month is $10. It's a pretty big scale, right? So every time somebody's doing something in your web application, that's probably a click going back to the backend. That's a Lambda execution. DynamoDB, this is Amazon's NoSQL database solution. So those of you that are a little bit deeper into tech, you always have to figure out where you're going to store your data. The sort of way that you always did it 10 years ago was you used, pretty much your standard relational database systems, Oracle, SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, others. Sometimes relational is still the right answer. For this customer, we were able to go with DynamoDB. Again, no servers to manage. You pay for the throughput in and out of the database tier. They're using other things like Cognito, which is a user authentication and authorization service. So whenever you build a web app, usually the first place you start is like, okay, what's going to be my role-based authentication scheme? That's the first thing you go build. You don't build it anymore. You're using a service from AWS. So the bottom line here is there's 136 different Lambdas that support the functioning of 5x5's web presence. Their website had its busiest month last month, and I looked because I was doing some stuff for AWS. They didn't even spend $20 to operate this web presence last month. Okay, so that's great, right? As a startup, that this thing's just going to scale. Lambda executions, there's a soft limit from AWS of 5,000 simultaneous executions. And they truly mean simultaneous executions, but that can be lifted to beyond 100,000. The soft limit exists so that you don't run your bill up inadvertently. So there's some guardrails by AWS to protect yourself.
So I want to underline this real quick because I want to tie this back to what we said earlier in the conversation about there are people who are not thinking that things are ready for prime time. And in a lot of cases, one of your disruption points available is the fact that your competition has not yet moved to serverless. They're not yet as optimized from a cost perspective, and they're not yet as able to scale up because they built on servers. They built on what they knew, and their architecture is 10 or 15 years old. And this is a key place where you can actually do something less expensively and be scalable for when you hit the hockey stick inflection point. And it all comes down to just when did you get in the game?
Right. Yep. Okay. So let's move on. So where is 5x5 going next? So this is where AI and ML is becoming pretty real. Could we use AI to detect and identify rust on the cell tower? Or a crack? Or do A to B 6 months apart, did the crack grow? Okay. This is something that they're starting to look at. But what we're actually working on for them right now is an AI model that can basically build an inventory of all the different antennas and radio units that are attached to the tower without a human having to do it. And we're actively building this for them right now, and then have the ability to do a delta from flight to flight. So towers have to be inspected at least once a year. Now, here's something I didn't even realize about the cell phone and cell tower industry. There are companies like Crown Castle, who's a Pittsburgh area company. They're one of the largest cell tower owners in the world. They own something like 40,000 cell towers. Well, they rent the space out on the cell tower to the cell phone companies. And they charge them based upon how much space they're using on the cell tower, but they may not exactly know what the cell phone company put on the tower, or if they change something. So this solution that we're building for 5x5 will look at the photos, use a machine learning algorithm to identify the types of antenna, where the antenna is located, and be able to do a diff from flight to flight to say what changed on the tower. Again, this is just using pattern matching and other neural networks to identify different antennas based upon shape, number of cables going into them, things like that, to build out a manifest of what's attached to the cell tower. Running in a serverless way, though, that core architecture being serverless, of paying only for what you need when you need it, frees up the money to allow the organization to dive into some of these more critical and areas of innovation. So what we want to do right now, that sort of ends the overview of and case study. What I wanted to do just briefly was sort of take a quick tour of what is the AWS console. So what, like, if you were to create an AWS account, what do you see? And I think I just want to demystify a little bit of it for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump out of the deck and change what I'm sharing here real quick. Okay. Scott, can you see my web browser?
Yes. Deep Lens admin model downloader.
Yep. So here is the AWS console. Like once you log in, you're met with the management console. So this is like how you're going to start to interact with AWS. As your comfort capability, maybe you go hire a DevOps guy for your business. You're going to typically organizations start to move away from using the web browser to doing things off of the command line or through automated means, through SDKs and things like that. That's a natural progression, or you start moving into using templates and things called infrastructure as code. But a lot of times you'll start out at the console, right? And the thing that I think is the biggest challenge for new customers in AWS, and I call it the alphabet soup, that is AWS. So everything is a 3-letter acronym or abbreviation or has some strange name that doesn't really mean anything to anybody. Okay, that is the biggest challenge, and it's a challenge on any cloud provider for that matter. So things like EC2, well, this is actually the Elastic Compute Cloud. The Elastic Compute Cloud is, where I go if I want to run virtual machines. So, if anybody's familiar with VMware and that way of doing things, this is the idea. I've got different virtual machines running. I can come in, I can see them, I can check on their state, see what size they are. But again, we talked about this idea of serverless. Well, I can go over to Lambda. And so this is one of our house accounts where we do some development and we trial some different things out. But here are some Lambdas that we did where we were using an Amazon Deep Lens to do facial detection algorithms and doing some other things around, could we do sentiment analysis of people's faces in an audience? And so I can go in here and take a look at what's this Lambda function thing look like, right? So I get a graphical view of like, okay, how am I set up? I can actually, because this one is written, I believe in Python. Yeah, this one's in Python. Actually, I have a code editor right here. I can edit my code for this Lambda function right here. And if I save it, AWS is automatically going to redeploy this code for me. the beautiful thing about serverless is I don't have to worry about the underlying servers. I write my code, I give it to AWS, they're going to run it when I ask them to invoke it for me. Okay.
Scott, real quick, we had a side question about Elastic Container Service, and I know it's not the thrust of what you're talking about, but Albert wanted to know, does it support ELK? Which I apologize, I don't know what ELK is, so I'm just going to pass it on to you and pretend as though everything is fine with that.
Oh, the ELK stack. So the ELK stack is actually, ELK stands for Elasticache or Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. So in AWS, there's actually a service. So there's an Elasticsearch service that already comes pre-configured with Logstash and Kibana. And there's actually, I think, a quick start to get it all up and running. I did it a couple of years ago, and then I said, okay, cool, I could do it, but I'm going to go buy a third-party system that basically does the same thing. But yes, so there's Elasticsearch service so that you do not have to, it's a platform service for Elasticsearch. You configure Logstash, you start pumping logs into it, and your Kibana dashboards are right there, and you can start to build it. So I think, yeah, the ELK isn't really related to the container. So yeah, so AWS has full support for Elasticsearch, and then running, getting the full ELK stack up and running. From a container standpoint, we can do pretty much anything you want to do with containers. The big buzz in the market right now is Kubernetes. It's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine as well. We help a lot of new customers understand how to do containers. And because Kubernetes is sort of like the go-to word in containers universe right now, a lot of people want to do Kubernetes. But I will tell you, as a startup, unless you have a whiz person on staff that has done Kubernetes before, there was easier ways to do containers. Okay, containers is a modern cloud native architecture inside of AWS, or just in general. But I really encourage people to take a look at the Elastic Container Service from AWS before you start doing the brain damage of trying to understand Kubernetes.
Yeah, at the risk of stoking the fires of holy war here, the other problem, even though I realize that there are some purists along these lines, is that staffing as a startup is one of the critical conversations, and being able to transcribe technical needs to how much is talent going to cost you is a really important back and forth you have to do across the boundary between being a business founder and being a technical founder.
Yep.
I don't think we've seen much talent locally for Kubernetes at all. I don't know that I'm right about that, but I don't know that we've seen it.
We typically see if somebody's got somebody, it's hard to keep them because it's such a hot button thing. We do see a lot of companies saying they want to do it, and I ask them, why do you want to do it? And they're like, because it's the thing. I'm like, that's not the reason to do it.
Those are bad answers, yes.
Yeah. So Albert, why did I go with a third-party service? I wanted dashboards out of the box for a bunch of AWS services. So I went to a third party called Sumo Logic that is basically ELK on steroids, but through, that I'm purchasing something, pre-built dashboards and all kinds of things like that. So it was more of a build versus buy type of approach that I went down on that. So back to the console real quick. Your keys to do anything in AWS are available here in the console. If you go to the services dropdown, again, how many different things you can do in AWS, okay? It can be overwhelming when you first come into here. And again, this list continues to grow. This is why it really is important to think about talking to a partner to help you understand how to get started and get these things configured correctly from the beginning. Because it can be. I mean, let's look under databases. I mean, we've got the relational database service, of which there's 6 different flavors that you can run: Oracle, SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, MariaDB, let alone Aurora. You've got DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL data store. You've got Elasticache, so this is like Redis and Memcache. Neptune is the graph database as a service from AWS. QLDB, this is a quantum ledger database, so people doing things with blockchain. DocumentDB, this is sort of a MongoDB-like database engine. Key spaces, if anybody's ever heard of Cassandra, very popular, very, very large scale NoSQL data systems. Actually, I think NASA runs the largest, either NASA or Apple runs the largest Cassandra database in the world. And then TimeStream. So TimeStream is a time series database, very popular time series data coming off of IoT things. So again, just trying to figure out what's the right database technology to use, right? As you're going into this as a cloud native, what are you trying to do, is a challenge. So your keys to the kingdom exist within the console. And I just wanted to, give you a brief tour of what's here, the scale of things. But again, everything initially, a lot of customers start out in the console. You very rapidly move to things like CloudFormation templates, automation, SDKs, and the command line.
So if I can jump in here.
Yep.
While you've been talking for basic things, I've been taking pages from the public AWS website and putting it into the chat box.
Yep.
And I think now is a good time to talk about how you can start making plans around, your use and what it is that you're getting yourself into. We've identified for a lot of this conversation that there are right ways and wrong ways. So I said, like, there's a well-architected framework out there and whatnot. And, we've talked a little bit about jump ahead to a serverless as opposed to necessarily just assuming that everything's going to be, done with a server, VM deployed in the cloud. But the other thing that I want to call everyone's attention to is that for each of these product links, AWS is very transparent about what's the pricing and how does that pricing work as a model. So in other words, you're going to pay by the usage in Lambda. Scott was telling you earlier, and I think it was $10 for his 2 million calls that he was doing in his example, right? Well, that pricing is actually on the page that was, set aside for Lambda. The EC2 pricing, the RDS pricing, all of these things that you've been hearing, you can jump straight into the service. You can get rolling with the service through the console that he's shown you. But I think it's really important to remember also that the pricing is available on those public facing websites before you get started. And just that financial aspect of it, that requires every bit as much attention as the why and the how and the who. You can start to do a lot of your own legwork and start to figure out what fits you and how much money you might want to raise from a friends and family round or a seed round early on, and get a sense for, like, how many users do I think I'm going to have? How many users do I want to have before I go to angels? These kinds of questions are a lot easier to solve when it's not a black box where you always have to ask somebody for a quote or a price book or the latest price sheet. So I've been through the struggle with some of you. I know some of you personally. I know that this is always a challenge, is not having to always mother may I for financial information.
So wanted to leave you with a couple things. How do you get started? Obviously, 50 minutes from Scott and I is not going to be enough to truly get you started in your AWS journey. So we have a pretty active YouTube channel. And Courtney just also, I think, put this, maybe put this link actually into the chat. We have a collection of what we call 10-minute tech talks. We have 20-minute tech breaks and talks from our tech talks around the country that you could go to and use that as a learning tool. There's a really great online training site that can train you in a lot of things. AWS can prepare, your technical teams for AWS certification called A Cloud Guru. That's pretty much the gold standard on, a lot of it tends to be hands-on keyboard, trying to teach you and get you up to speed. And then I also wanted to provide the link here around AWS Activate for startups. So Activate is a multi-tiered program to start to help startups at different stages in their funding lifecycle to start their journey on AWS. In terms of, it can start out initially, I think, at the lowest level. You can just be a startup with no significant backing, and I think you get $1,000 in usage credits and $1,000 in training credits. It goes all the way up to, and for instance, 5x5, they, because of who was backing them after their Series A, they qualified for $100,000 in usage credits. They had 2 years to burn through. Okay, so in the Activate program, you can step through the different tiers. It's not like, you know, if you use it at the lowest level, you can't get up to the 100,000. You can actually step through it. They made it a lot easier to apply into this program as well. So it's a great place to get started. I'll also tell you, through partners, there are sometimes other co-funding capabilities that can be brought to bear for companies and for startups. You know, we're doing some projects with some other startups where there's other funding programs. A lot of those run through the use of a partner, because AWS wants to make sure, you know, you're going to be successful. And then, as Scott just put into the chat, the idea of the free tier. So almost all services from AWS have what they call a free tier, where you can start to experiment and not pay anything for a couple months and sometimes up to a year of using that service. Like I said, there's a free tier for Lambda that has like 1 million invocations a month and a certain amount of duration. Looks like there's maybe one other question from Eric. Yeah, WordPress. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to work on. I'm not the expert on like how to configure WordPress. I've had to build WordPress environments, but I don't deal too deeply with the WP options and things like that. But we do have some people that maybe can work with Scott back at the office that are WordPress experts. My work with WordPress has been more like getting containerized environments up for WordPress to operate inside of it.
I already sent the question over, and the answer back is no. Unfortunately, with WordPress, it's deleted occasionally.
Okay, perfect. So,
sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you
no,
off.
I was just gonna say, so, you know, I hope that this was useful to everybody. I think there's been some good questions posted in the chat. If there's any other questions, we got another minute or two here now, or, you know, reach out to Scott or myself on LinkedIn or other channels, and we'd be happy to continue to help.
Scott, if it's cool, I think what I'd like to do while Q&A starts rolling, I'd like to show a couple of those AWS public facing website pages, you know, and just kind of, you know, show the navigation. So we're going to see if I can kick you off without asking. Oh, I can kick you off without asking. That's lovely. Look at that. All right. So this was the first one I had open. This was the free tier. Basically, all of the AWS website pages are going to look like this. I like the free tier conversation because this begins you just in terms of being able to figure out how to stretch your legs without necessarily running up a bill, and especially as a startup, as an entrepreneur. You know, some of these things, you don't even know if they're right for you. So as you scroll through here, you'll see lots of filters. So for example, this EC2, which if you remember from the chat box, it was the Elastic Cloud Compute. You get 750 hours to run this virtual machine per month for the first 12 months. And that's what this is telling you here, is that this is the type of offer that they have for the free tier. But you could also check this box here and see things that are always free. So you know, when Scott was talking about Lambda, the first 1 million requests to run code are always free every month as part of Lambda. Let me open this chat box. You know what? I'm just going to do it the lazy way. So I don't have to reopen the chat box. There we go. S3, we were talking about simple storage service. Now, this is a perfect example of an AWS public-facing web page that I think if the first time you come in, you may miss some of the details that are insanely useful. As you come through here, you can see, I don't know, what I would call sort of like the top level executive summary information. And it tells you that these are the different things that you might want to know about, especially as you consider what choices you might have. But look here in this gray bar, you have these other sub pages to the S3 product page. I was mentioning pricing earlier. Here's the pricing page. And it tells you exactly how it works. You pay for storing objects in your S3 buckets, the rate you're charged, et cetera, et cetera. It takes you through here. But then the next thing you see right here is just plain public facing pricing information. And you can start to calculate, how much am I going to spend if I decide to jump into this? No black box, no that Know that feeling in your gut, like, oh, should I get a salesperson involved and have them, like send me a note every 2 days because they want my money, right? You can actually start doing the work and figure out, like, does this make sense, or is it really smarter to just do the calculation and go and get funding? So I kind of wanted to walk through these. Everything that AWS does has a public-facing web page like this. I'm pretty sure I could just punch in EC2 and go where I'm trying to go here, and I can. Same idea, gray bar, I'll give you features list, pricing breakdown. So this is not a situation where, again, I don't want to be too critical of some of our friends locally, but I think a lot of people do ready, fire, aim when it comes to planning how they're going to build things. And then they find out later that maybe there was a better way to do it, or there was a cheaper way to do it, or they should have saved their pennies a little bit longer before they got started. And I just want to make sure you understand all the tools that are available to make sure that you can plan as far into the future, as you can see, and actually start making your projections so that you can bring them to life. So did any questions pop up here while I was sharing my screen? Oh, look at these. Connect with Scott McTaggart, connect with Scott Weber. These were very well done, Ben. That is a polish and professionalism that, I could stand to have on all my presentations.
Thank you so much, Scott and Scott, for this very informative seminar. We do have a few minutes if anybody has any, sort of like last minute questions for Scott, for any of the Scotts. I think we did copy all of the links to all of this, the resources that you provided today. So we'll be sending those out along with a survey just to make sure to, for you to let us know how we did. But, in the interest of time, if there are some questions, we do have the space open for a few more minutes.
I tossed my email in the chat too, if anybody just wants to send me an email directly.
All right. I guess there are no more questions. Just wanted to say thank you again, Scott and Scott. We have your information here with us. And thank you for joining us today. And we will be posting this video online in our YouTube channel just to make sure that you get a refresher again. But I think that will be the seminar today. I really want to thank you for your time, and I'll see you next time.